Hey yo, it's Guido coming at you with a tactics talk and a review of the LHMTV Tier 8 British light tank. Billed as one of the worst light tanks in one of the worst, if not the worst, light tank line in the game. Hogwash. Complete hogwash. Absolute garbage. No, not the tank. The idea that they're bad is hogwash. Now let's take a look at this. We're going to take an objective look. I'm going to give you examples of gameplay. I'm going to show you my stats. We're going to talk a little bit about why this tank is so good. Because it is. It is. And I know the vast majority of people whose well has already been poisoned by a bunch of people who had conniption fits when the tanks weren't rolled out stronger than other light tanks. But as a matter of fact, there are a couple things they do that are much, much better than other light tanks. And I'm going to back it up because I'm going to show you my stats and some gameplay. And we're going to talk about why these tanks are actually pretty darn good. Pretty darn good. Well, let's get started. Let's get started. We're going to do an overview, look at the tech tree considerations, look at the 3D model, such as it is. Look at a comparison amongst its peers, look at my stats, my setup, and some examples of gameplay for my review of the LHMTV Tier 8 British light tank. Well, here it is. First thing you'll note is it's a little fella. Little fella. Look at the Black Dog. Absolutely massive. Even the T92 is pretty big as compared to it. The American Bulldog versions are quite large tanks. The LT432, just massive. The Hawk is gigantic. The only thing that's close to it and slightly smaller is the ELC even 90. And the T92 is not too much bigger, but still small. And of course the tiny, or at least it used to feel tiny, Hawk 12. But this thing is even smaller. And this is important because the size of this thing is one of those intangibles, and it is part of what makes this tank so darn good. We'll talk about it as we go, but the size, in this case, the size matters. And if you'll remember, let's just talk about this for a minute. If you'll remember when the ELC even 90 came out and the stats were shown, people had another conniption fit. Not quite as major as this one because it wasn't a whole line, plus it was a premium tank. But a lot of people looked at the stats and went, oh, it's a terrible tank. Well, it's actually a pretty good tank. And the reason is because it's so small and mobile, it can go and do things other light tanks cannot do. Of course, it's also got the autoloader on it, but we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the comparison. With the LHMTV, kind of interesting actually, this was a vehicle that was built for easy air transportation. It's extremely light, one of the lightest tanks in the entire game at about 4 tons or so. We'll look at it. Tank developed for 3 years, one prototype was manufactured, so it was meant to be air mobile. Clearly, that's why it is such a little compact guy. But when we get to it, you will note it's got quite a gun for the size. Quite a gun for the size, even if its DPM is a little bit low. All right, let's move on to the tech tree consideration. First, let's have a chat about the crew because it does matter. Unfortunately, the Tier 10 is a 2-crew tank. I hope Wargaming changes that because that is a gigantic screw job right there. They absolutely need to change that into a commander, driver, gunner, which is what you're going to have with the LHMTV, the Tier 9, and which you also had at the Tier 7 setter. So your setter crew will go right up to your LHMTV, and then that will transition to your GSOR, no problem. Then once you get to the Manticore, you got a bit of an issue because your crew gets boned at that point. Sorry for the language, but that is probably one of the biggest head scratchers about this line is why on earth Wargaming, you know, as far as the shrill shrieking about the line, completely agree with the people who are noting that 2 crew at the N tier tank is ridiculous. You know, you're going to have to throw away Wargaming some of your realism there and not screw over your players by putting a 2 crew tank at Tier 10 after they ground through all these tanks. I mean, it's beyond comprehension, to be quite honest. So I hope they change that. We'll see what happens. But as far as the crew goes, no problem up until the Tier 9. And then we, of course, got the Manticore, which is actually a pretty good tank as well from what I've seen out there. Only other thing to note on here is that you don't have a lot of stuff to unlock, so just 1 track, 1 engine, 1 radio. You are going to have to go through the turret to get to the 85mm L40, HV-L40. I wouldn't even bother with this gun up here. Again, actually that's the stock gun, so you're going to bother. It's right there. You know, That's the one you're going to shoot. All right, that's fine. It's actually got a decent amount of penetration, but this is the gun that makes this bad boy shine with 226 pen and 258 with its gold on a tier 8 light tank. Fantastic. 230 average damage is pretty good, but we'll take a look at that when we get into the comparisons. So not a whole lot to say about what you're going to unlock on there. So we'll move on to the 3D model, like I said, such as it is. Well, here it is in all its glory and massive armor. You will note that it's, 30 millimeters. Even on the turret, it's 60 or so. On the side, it's 30 or even less, 20. So what's the problem here? The problem is heat, or HE, heat as well, provided it doesn't get in the track. But HE especially is going to be an issue for this tank. So watch out for your T49s, your high penetration HE round scouts, which is quite a few of the new ones, to be quite honest. And one thing you need to know, we'll get a little bit into the tactics here right now, is this is not a counter scout. You are not going to rage forward and take on other scouts with this. It's going to lose in a 1v1, just a straight up, hey, we're going to just punch each other in the face 1v1 most of the time. Most of the time. It does have a good alpha, so if you come at a scout that's near dead around the 230 hit points, and you may have a good time because you're going to one-shot him from his low hit point situation. But of course that applies to any low hit point situation, so do be careful about that. Nothing else really to say. But I will note one thing, which I didn't talk about in the overview. Notice that the turret is right at the top, and that the gun is at the very top of the turret. So when you come over hills, you can expose very little of your tank, and we'll get to it in a minute, but it is minus 10 degrees of depression. This does give this thing a bit of advantage when poking over hills. Now, you're not going to bounce anything off of the turret, obviously, because it has no armor. But as far as being a small target, the tank's already tiny. Look how tiny the little turret is on top. And the gun line, when you're peeking down the gun line, you're just not exposing a whole bunch. That gun's going to come up more or less first as you come over to ridges. And with a minus 10 depression, that's very useful in certain situations. Very useful. All right, let's move on to the comparison. Now, here's where things start to get really interesting with this tank. And this is largely where all of the wailing and gnashing of teeth from certain people started about how the stats are terrible and the tank is terrible and yada yada. Well, we'll take a look at the stats and we'll talk a little bit about what's important here and what makes this tank good as far as the stats go. And the first thing I think you'll note is the penetration, which I've already talked about, is fantastic at 226. Why does that matter? Well, it matters quite a bit actually, because when you are hanging back a little bit and sniping, attempting to stay alive to the mid to late game, and you do have that kind of medium to longer range shot, you're in that little tiny tank, but you've got that great big heavy, at least British heavy gun with that great penetration, and you're not going to need a whole lot of gold. You're going to actually be able to punch through some people's faces, especially you're talking about tier 7 heavy tanks, tier 6 heavy tanks, no problem at all with that thing. And to some extent, some of the higher tier tanks with say mediums, things like that, you can really surprise people on how well you can pen them, and that is a bit of an advantage. You're not just plinking off like you might be with some of these other guys at 175 and 170 and 176 who are going to be dabbing 2 all day long, and you're not going to need to. And if you do dab 2, you've got some pretty good, excellent, or some pretty excellent extra pen to go along with it. 230 average damage is decent, slightly less than the Black Dog and the Hawk 12. Remember that the Black Dog up there is basically an 8.5. It was left alone when the scout rebalance happened, and unfortunately it came out the other side of that. Unfortunately for the game, fortunately for anyone who owns it, slightly OP at about an 8.5 scout, to be quite honest. I didn't talk about this, but I've taken all of these tanks and given them 100% crew, top modules, unless they were a premium, which they already had top modules, and no kind of equipment or food or bonuses of any kind on there. The Black Dog actually has a little bit of camo bonus because I can't strip off. It's got the GF, the Grand Finals paint scheme, so I have that version, and it automatically gets a bonus on its camouflage. So what else we got? Rate of fire is relatively slow, as you can see. Reload time is quite long, which is another thing people will hang their hat on and say it's terrible. This is a detriment to some extent. The same problem the setter had. Both the hull traverse and the gun traverse are relatively slow for a scout, and getting circled by other scouts is kind of a problem, or bringing your turret around for fast moving tanks is kind of a problem, especially wheeled tanks are a real bear. But again, this is not a tank you want to be counter scouting or taking on wheeled tanks if you can at all avoid it. -10 is good on the gun depression, top of the line right there. The +15 is a problem. The lookup is an issue. You get on back slopes and try to look across a hill. That's a big issue. So you do have to be a little bit careful with that. Aim time would be really nice if that was a little bit faster. I didn't notice too much of an issue. Around 2 is pretty comfortable. Not quite as nice as the Bulldog in there. And then 0.35 dispersion is basically as good as it gets at this tier. None of these guys are very accurate overall. Now this is another number that people really had a cow about, 1,410 average damage per minute. I'm going to tell you, when we look at my stats, it did not cause me any issues. In fact, I have a slightly higher damage per game, or right in there and even with some of my best tier 8 scouts. Why? Well, DPM is important in this game, but don't get too crazy about it, because the game isn't about putting your unit in front of each other, so to speak, and blasting away. And he who has the higher DPM wins. That's not how this game works. Very rarely do you get to just get out in front of someone and out DPM them. There's a lot of maneuvering, there's a lot of pulling back, there's a lot of getting into cover, all kinds of things going on. So yes, if you roll out and you want to try to out DPM one of these other scouts, you will note that you're probably in big trouble. In fact, a couple of them may actually get a couple bounces from you despite your high pin, because they have some armor on turrets, things like that, and you're unlikely to bounce anything. But that's not the point of this tank. That's not the point of this tank. So really, it would be nice if the DPM was a little higher. If it was, I'm going to tell you, if it had, say, 1,800, which would have still made it at the bottom of this list, it would have had my highest damage per game of all my scouts, easily. So it did not hurt it. As a matter of fact, it probably helped a little in that it makes you more careful. We'll talk about that as we go. Taking a look at the survivability, we'll roll this up above my little icon right there. Hit points is relatively low at 1050, but not as bad as the even 90. You can see that the armor just doesn't exist. The turret armor, at least the face of the turret armor, will give a little bit of trouble for auto pens from HE, but the rest of the tank not so much. Most people's HE is going to give you a bad day. Look at that weight. It's just tiny. Little thing. Specific power's 3.3, a little bit low. The tier 9 fixes this with a little bit more horsepower and is very sprightly. This thing will get up and go eventually, but it doesn't accelerate really great out of the gate, and that's probably one of the biggest problems mobility-wise. And look at the traverse speed. That's what I talked about earlier. That whole traverse is simply atrocious. This thing is not going to circle much of anyone. I mean, it can. It does okay with that if it's a slow heavy or a slow medium or something like that. But as far as out circling one of these other scouts, that simply is not going to happen. And down here, it's hard to see, but you have 19.49 on concealment, which is the best here except for the tiny little ELC even 90. In fact, it's 5% or so better than most of them. And well, 2 to 5% better than the Bulldog, better than 2% better than the Hawk. It's a really great concealment. So you add a couple of these things together, and again, we're going to get to this, these kind of intangibles. The concealment is tangible because it's a number and there's math involved in how it works within the mechanics of the game. But you add the small size with the great concealment, plus it's a scout which gets concealment when it moves. You start adding things like camouflage, your crew has camouflage, you put a camouflage directive, you've got food, all those things together, and all of a sudden you've got a very, very stealthy tank. And because of its tiny size, it can move around the map to places that other tanks cannot do. If you're a fan of the ELC even 90, you will understand exactly what that means. Because the ELC even 90 can sneak into bushes and places that other tanks cannot go. This entire line does very similar to that. It's an entire line of ELC even 90s, essentially, in regards to camouflage and being stealthy. The view range is 380, which is probably about 10 less than it really needs to be. It should be 390 to be quite honest, but there's other 380s here, the even 90, the LT 432. Signal range is at 700, which, does anyone care? I don't know. It's got the worst radio of the bunch, so maybe that's why it's bad. So what do we have here? What we have here is an ELC 90-esque sneaky assassin. A tank that you need to be very careful with, but if you can get to the end of the game, because the end of most games is about mobility and vision, if you can get this bad boy to the end of a game, it is an absolute assassin. It really is. It can get to places they will not expect. Even early game, it can do a lot of that as well. And hopefully I can show you some of those things on the replays of it getting into places that you basically would not believe. Pretty awesome. Pretty awesome. And again, it's those intangible things. I'm going to do a video later on. We're going to talk about systems and the outliers in systems and why sometimes the sum of the bad parts is much better than those parts. And this, we have that example here in the LHMTV. If we were all to just simply sit down and look at those stats, we would all come to the same conclusion that the hysterics came to, which was that it's a terrible tank and it's not worth grinding through. Well, I can tell you what, it is not a terrible tank, and it is very much worth grinding through. If you are any kind of light tank player, you're going to absolutely love this thing. I'm telling you, you will. It's fantastic. All right, let's move on to my stats. Here's how I did in it. 67 battles, 66% win rate with a 969 average XP on it. These are all solo. My setter at 45 battles was 64%. My GSOR at 55 battles is currently 62%. These are not anomalies at this point. Now, if we got them all to 100 and I'm still above 60, I'll be actually a little bit surprised. But I fully expect if I played every one of these to 100 battles, I'd be 55 to 58%. And that is very, very reasonable. Very reasonable as a solo light tank player. And as a matter of fact, at this point, I'm really feeling like I'd be above 60 in all three of them. In all three of them. They are actually that good. They just win. They find a way to win. Anyway, the LHMTV. I'm really selling this thing, aren't I? Battle 67, 65.67 win rate. Survival 56. That's because it's just a invisible assassin. Damage ratio is up there. Destruction at 2.93. Armor use, yeah, it's got no armor. 969, I mentioned that. 1,356 damage DPG with 731 received and 978 assist, which is actually pretty darn good. 2.09 on the spotted, destroyed 1.27, and I had a 7-kill game with a 3,869 damage. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to show you that game because there was a micro patch that broke the replay. So I've got some other games for you that will go over right there. But this really compares well to my other tier 8 light tanks like I talked about. So here we go. We're looking at 1356 and almost 1,000. So 13.5 and almost 1,000 on assistance. So if we go find another light tank that I like here, we got the even 90. It's sitting at 12 with more assist. This thing is so stealthy. Batchat 12T, much worse. Let's talk about the EBR. Worse, sitting at 58%. We'll go ahead and head up here to the Russian ones. Let's take a look at some of the Russian light tanks. The 432, 61% for me, looking at 1,200 and 729 assists. So I'm actually doing a bit better in the Brit. The LTTB, which is one of my favorite light tanks of all time. 757 assists on that one. Keep on moving. Let's look at the Hawk 12, also panned as a bad one. Well, it's at 11 and 761. At least those stats stand up to the it's a bad tier 8 light tank. I actually happen to like the Hawk 12 okay. But I'm clearly outperforming the Hawk 12 in the Brit, which is supposedly a terrible tank. The 90GF 1400, this is one of the best tanks that I play at 786 with the assistance, so a little bit more damage. But as you can see, it is right in the standard ballpark for how I play my tier 8 light tanks, a number of which I have 3 marked. The numbers simply do not stand up to the idea that it is an awful, terrible light tank. They don't. And I am actually looking forward to seeing what the global numbers are. I'm not going to make any predictions. It's very possible because it is a high skill ceiling, or sorry, a high skill floor tank. It is a high skill floor tank. So we'll see what happens though, but my suspicion is I don't think it's going to be that far off from any other light tanks, and I really don't think it's going to be at the bottom. We'll find out though. That remains to be seen. Let's move on to my... All right, here you can see. Now, understand that I did not play this anything but fully upgraded. I basically stopped doing that. I usually have enough free experience to unlock modules, and then I will grind through the tank with the fully upgraded mode or model or whatever you want to call it. I don't think there's a lot of utility to going over how to play something stock or less than stock. You just have to be a lot more careful. You got to fight through it if that's what you're going to do. If we're going to talk about whether a tank's good or not, we want to talk about whether its top configuration is good. So we got top configuration, and I went pure, vision, and camo. I don't think you're going to find many people running this setup, but I ran binocs, camo net, and optics. Which means if I could get into some of those forward bushes and get spotting, it got real deadly real fast for the enemy team. It's not an offensive powerhouse, is it? We looked at the DPG, it's very low. I felt like there was very little reason to try to add to that. Let's go ahead and work on its strengths, right? Its ability to get around the map, its ability to see, its ability to cover up once it stops if you can get into a bush. All of those things is what I wanted to maximize. I ran putting in T, and I ran directives. The best ones, I think, are going to be your camo directive. That one's fantastic. Vent purge, although I'm not running vents, so you can't really use that in this case. Optical calibration was fantastic. So optical calibration and natural cover are probably the two of the best if you've got them. The other nice one would be increased focus, which will let your sixth sense go off a little bit early. This is in fact not the crew. I did the majority of the grinding in. I've already moved them on to the tier 9, but it's a similar setup. The only thing is the commander was a little bit better because it was the special brick commander, so we had a couple more skills on top of that. But that's the crew I've got in there right now. Funnily enough, I brought them over for my Churchill gun carrier, which I 3-marked. So they're very happy to not be in the Churchill gun carrier anymore. All right, that is my setup. Let's take a look at some examples. All right, here is our first example of the LHMTV gameplay. Let's make sure you can see everything you need to see here. And we're here on Ghost Town, and it is an assault map. We're on the attack. And what I talked about a bit was this thing can go to places and do things that other light tanks cannot do, or only a couple select handful. So I will come up here, and there is actually a bush on both of these kind of hills over here. There's one on the other side, there's one here, but this one's the best one from the attacking side because I can actually take this tiny little tank and sneak right up into this bush. Take a surprise shot on him. We don't get it. Now that was a little bit dopey because I am in a big flat open area. The good news is more than likely their tanks aren't quite in position to take a shot at me. So that was a risky deal. I could have stayed there. What I didn't want to do was have the T-50-2 come straight up. So now I'm going to swing around. I'm just going to use the nice camo on this thing. Sneak one into him. Fully zoomed. True talked about this on the Manticore. I will tell you it's the same for all of these tanks. It's pretty standard for any tank really, but these especially seem to do very well if you let it fully zoom in and settle. So I can move right into this little tiny bush, and just look at the size of this thing. There's plenty of tanks that can't even use this, or they're too wide. You'll have too many angles off to the side. They're too tall. All kind. Look, I can just really just sneak into this bush, take a shot on him. I don't even get spotted, so I'll just continue to use this bush and move up here. And there we go. We've got another guy coming in. I'm looking for someone to shoot him, but they don't quite do it. I didn't have time to move back. There you go. So we'll make this bush go dark, and we'll try to sneak a shot in on this guy. There we go. So we do that, and down he goes. And I'm just using this bush spotting guys. I can see him coming in. And it just does this better than other scouts. Clearly other scouts can do it, but this one really excels at this kind of gameplay in weird little bushes. I mean, everyone knows that bush is there, and people use it, but this thing just uses it better. And it mostly has to do with its size, obviously, and its camouflage. So we've locked down this side. That scout is bailing out. Now that's good SA actually. When a scout bails out from a position or a flank, it usually means that there's not much left there. Maybe somebody, a TD or something in the very back, but more than likely there's nothing. I see the 14-5 come up. I'm kind of watching. He's the canary for me. I didn't really want to go blazing right into a TD, but he doesn't take immediate hits, so now I'll just follow him up, and I'll be looking to get out in front and get him some lights. So nice speed. You can see the speed of the tank in a straight line. It does very well. Does not maneuver too great. We talked about that a bit. The traverse is not great. And then we get a spot on the M44. That was our spot. I mean, look at that. Just all that nice range. We'll let this thing zoom in. And I miss high. That's a bit of a bummer. The other one's making a runner. Looks like somebody else got a light on him. I get lit because I fired, and now we'll move forward. I think the 14.5 actually saw the M40-43. And now we're in the end game, is the next place that I talked about that this game, or this tank, excels. If you can survive to this part of the game, especially if you've got considerable hit points, which gives you options, you can then get in amongst the remainder of the team and start gobbling up both assist and damage. And again, it excels at this because it's so small. There was an example of its elevation being a problem. Notice how my hull was on a downhill slope. I actually right there couldn't take that shot because my 15 degrees did not allow the gun to get on him. And that is definitely one of the low points of this tank, which I've mentioned. So we've got the 3 guys there in town. We've got a Hawk 12 running around somewhere and a 59-16. So we'll just come around these ships right here. I'm looking for that side shot or back shot into the 5-1. He's over there. I can move through this. No problem. Not going to get spotted unless there's a scout really nearby. Just come up into this bush and we will find hopefully a shot on one of these dudes. He backs out and we'll just drop one into his side. Now there's that nice penetration. It is the side of a medium, but it's got great penetration, good accuracy if you let it zoom all the way in, and boom, we just assassinate that guy. And now we've got the Scorpion. We'll move down. Looking for a shot on him. He takes a hit. He's not very smart. Doesn't start moving. He takes a hit from us. Now the Hawk 12 is spotted. I do get spotted on that. I did fire from the open, so that's going to happen. Now, here's something to think about as well with these tanks. I'm going to approach in these folds of land right here, and it's so small. It can use terrain features like that better than most other tanks. Kind of like the Russian mediums will be able to do when they're such a low tank or they're not very tall, that they can sneak into places, in and out of places nicely. So we're going to come into here. Got a 59-16. I think I actually have some extra spotting on this based on what the final tally is. Kind of interesting. Sometimes your spotting does not show up in-game, but you actually end up with more. I think it was around 2,000, but I'll show you at the end. I don't remember if it was exactly this game. But this game isn't going to really blow anyone's sock off and say, you know, hey, greatest scout ever, but a competent scout does some things that other scouts can't do, and that's been my point about this line the whole time. It is really quite good in its role. Now let's look at another example. This next one's going to be a loss, but I'm going to talk a little bit about why it doesn't really have a higher DPM when we get to there. Here's the second example, and this is where I'm going to give the developers a lot of credit. A lot of times they haven't done very well with the whole I'm going to design a tank to do a specific role thing. You have to let the players play it to find out if it actually accomplishes that role. The interesting thing here is that a lot of players don't think it does accomplish its scout role, but what they did is they were trying to make a very stealthy, passive scout, not a damage dealing scout. They've got really low DPM. And that's just shooting behind him. Notice I take that shot and I don't get spotted. A lot of tanks can't shoot from there against a bulldog and not get spotted in that position. That's that great camo. And the reason these things don't have comparable DPM to other scouts is exactly what you're seeing here. You can play it because of the great pen, and also to some extent it doesn't have a lot of ammo. Because of the great pen, you can play it like this crazy, super stealthy TD, a lot like an E25, but more camo and a better gun. You know what I'm saying? Other than the E25 fires very quickly and has a higher DPM, the pen on this thing is awesome. So if they were to allow this thing either with a lot more alpha or with a lot more DPM, or both, which is probably what some people are calling for, you would have these things sitting in bushes like I'm doing, absolutely dominating. As it is, I'm going to do very well right here and not be too bothered even by the lack of ammo until the end of the battle. I actually run out of ammo on this one, I believe. Or I come close, that's true. I come close. I don't actually run out, but I'm only down to one shell. But you can see that it just excels at these kind of sneaky positions like this. Now right now, there's too many guns in the game. I don't really have the conditions set for being able to move around. So I go 204 on that guy, a little low roll there. And I'm just waiting for an opportunity to be able to get back and into their artillery, which I'm not going to end up with getting this time, end up getting on this game, because unfortunately up in the north they lose pretty badly, and then we end up getting surrounded down here. But we're getting a little spotting, we're getting a little damage. watching on the backside over there. And unfortunately, we don't have anybody over here in these bushes, and we don't know what's on their little side over there. It turns out there's going to be a couple tanks there, and that's going to be a problem. Now, I am not letting that fully zoom in, taking some risky shots, and I am courtesy backing up, because what you'll find here is sometimes a tank will just get a little bit further down or a little bit closer to you over in this area, and if you're not careful, they'll end up getting a light on you. Now, there's obviously the long reload is a bit of a liability there, and then I'm wasting shells. So a couple of those shots were really wastes. And when you're playing this game, you've got to be a lot more cognizant of how many snaps and just kind of risky or courtesy shots you take like that, because it will cost you at the end, which you'll see for me right here. Now the 251 goes in there. I would go in myself with him, but look at what we're losing right now, so I'm a little bit more turtled up. Just trying to help take that guy out, take those two guys out over there, and then maybe we can start working on that area right there, so where you can see that convoy that's just showed up. So we'll zoom in, take a nice little shot off of him. I'm kind of out in the open there, just firing away. Nobody's seeing me. And I don't take that shot because I realize now that I am starting to get low on ammo. So I've got 1,300 spotting. I'm at 1143 damage, but I'm sitting with math in public 15 shells left. So I'll watch this go, and unfortunately this looks okay right now at 5 to 6. The problem is we're about to lose our grill, and our map control is awful right now. Tenuous at best and going to awful as we lose the grill and we have nobody up top. So the 251 does some good work. He goes down there and starts looking for maybe the Conway or some of these near deads, the Patton or the Pantera. If we can get rid of those three, we might be in pretty decent shape considering the stealthiness of our tanks. One of the wild cards is that Sturb 103B has not been seen for a while, if at all, I guess. I don't really see it on there, I don't think. And of course, 2 artillery is going to be a big problem as we're attempting to hide in bushes up on hills. If we get spotted, we're going to get pretty well immediately nailed. Now I take another risky shot. That was another wasted shot, so that's something you do not want to do with this tank. The 251 gets hit. Unfortunately, there's something over there, and then we end up seeing the, what is this? The UDES 16 is coming down there. I don't quite have a shot on him. And really what I should have done, now that there's not that many guns in the game, I probably could have flexed over down to the south and seen if I couldn't have picked off the P44 or the Patton, snuck through the trees. A little bit too passive here. So probably just being way too passive, and I could have given my team a little bit more of a chance here. I'm kind of expecting the 251 to do the work, and he's doing a pretty good job, and then he finds the 103B. Now, I was a little bit torn on this one because he's lit, and we do need to get rid of him. We'd hate for them to turn him over. At the same time, I'm wasting a lot of shells trying to get rid of this guy at 200 something apiece, and down goes the RU. That hurts, and I really should have prioritized the Patton when I saw him right there. That was a huge mistake, and I'll just take a shot here. I get the guy, but we let the Patton go. So you can see multiple mistakes. Has nothing to do with the tank, but with the player right here completely. The tank is doing exactly what it is good at, which is assassinating from unobserved positions. And unfortunately, I'm not using its mobility very good. But this is what I was talking about. The last replay is that if this thing did have more DPM, if it did have better DPM, more alpha, or both, it would actually be OP. It would be like a mobile turreted E25. And I don't think that's really what the game needs. Right? They wanted it to be passive, but they also wanted it to have to move around a bit. So we'll go ahead and knock out the Suma. Look at that. I mean, just the pen on it is fantastic for a tier 8 light tank. Unfortunately, the 40T is not able to get rid of that UDES. And again, I don't move, so this is completely on me. I should have been moving around. I was really hoping the Pantera or the Patton would make a mistake and come up behind me out into the open. I'd be able to kill him. But they play this pretty smart, actually. So I should have flowed down there and seen what I could have done. Because I really needed to change this fight. We were just sort of allowing them to come in. I see the Patton a little bit late. I'm like, oh, geez, there he is. Missed him for a little while. Wish I'd have seen him a little bit earlier. Put a shot on him. Now the Scorpion's in a great spot. Unfortunately, I think he actually gets spotted here real quick. The Patton starts backing up, and I'm able to put one right. There he goes. And there's a shot again, another shot. I should have just waited a potato. I wish I'd have known the artillery was firing. And if he did tee it up, I completely missed it. So I've already mentioned it, probably, what, 4 shots, maybe 5 I shouldn't have taken. I'd have 5 more shells right now. So that made me feel pretty good getting rid of the Patton. I was next hoping the Pantera would make a mistake. That was a couple guys that came at us alone. And the Scorpion really is anchoring this fight right now. And obviously he's not the most stealthy tank right there. So if somebody walks up on him, he's going to be seen pretty quickly. So we're just sort of waiting for this thing. Just looking around. There we go. There's the... and because I'm now low, I don't really have the option to take that shot, and unfortunately I missed that opportunity. And now the Scorpion is seen, because he tries to go after the T-32. T-32 takes a hit. Down he goes, and then we pretty quickly, boom, there goes the Scorpion. And unfortunately, the Lorraine got spotted while he was doing that as well. So now there's just 3 of us. And we'll watch, again, we'll do a few things here that you can't do with other tanks. So watch as I'll start to finally move around here. So I'll head off this way with the Centurion. What I think we were both hoping was somebody would be coming up this way and we could tag team them if they were thinking that they kind of had the advantage. Now, a lot of them are up in the north, but really if we could just catch that Pantera or maybe one of the other guys flexing around. The AX is out in the open right there. Pretty soon someone's going to jump on Cap, and I think the AX actually starts taking damage here. The artillery was seen. Notice he's taking a couple hits. Thank goodness that splash didn't kill him, but I don't think he actually survives this whole thing. I believe somebody finally shoots him. The Centurion's down here kind of in the open, and then we have a guy on Cap, so I'm going to head off that way. Down goes, unfortunately, the 53-55, so I'm going to go off here, and then we see the UDES. He dies to the AX, which is good. And unfortunately, I think the AX, as he takes him down, no, that'll be a little while later. So really, I was starting to think we might be able to pull this thing out. Sitting with 2 shells, 4 gold, 2 HE. I will tell you, I will probably get rid of the HE on this tank. Just doesn't really need it. I see the Conway. I see the AX is probably going to go engage him. And I'm thinking, all right, well, you do that for a moment. He's down in the pit. Let me at least go find out where this guy is. There we go. And I do a bad job here because I don't find a bush to get into. He knows he's spotted, so I put a shot on him. Then he does a really smart thing here. He just comes towards the shell, and I don't back up. I do a little bit, but not enough. And he's just charging. He's going to get close enough to see me, unfortunately. And see how he's looking at me? As soon as you see a turret come at you like that, you know you're seen. And boom, the Pantera gets a piece of me. He misses one. That's that small size. Look at that. They're just missing because it's such a small little tank. I did knock the Cap down, and unfortunately there goes the AX getting his rear kicked. So I finally flexed back over here. I think we actually had time to go take down the Conway together and then flow over to get the IS-3. So again, not really great decision making on my part. Has nothing to do with the tank, just with the player at that point. And the IS-3 actually stays on Cap even though he saw me run off. That was kind of interesting. So I come here hoping the Conway will come up. I'm looking at the clock. I know we don't have a whole lot of time, 50 seconds. So let's head down here and see if we can't get rid of the Conway, and then we'll flow over and try to get the IS-3A. Pantera seems to be down on near the Cap somewhere, but I'm not sure exactly where. I get spotted, unfortunately. That's a bummer. No idea by what. So we'll head over this way. Oh, there he is. The Conway is right next to me. He snaps one on me. The AX takes a shot at him, and here's where this thing has just the right amount of mobility. The Conway's going to have trouble keeping his gun on me right there, and I can go right by him and take him down. Downhill obviously helped, so we'll do a little wiggle jiggle trying to get out of this guy's way. And then I see the AX, and I'm thinking, well, it's going to be up to the AX. If he can put a shot on that guy, or if I can get a light on him right here. There he is. So we see him. I'm trying to look for a highlight. There we go. We got a piece of him. We'll put another piece onto him. And unfortunately, the 3A took down the AX, which is lucky on his part. And I'll just fire here. I just take a chance finally. I'm going to have to try to get rid of that guy. And now all I've got to do is find a Pantera and 2 Arty. Now I already let the cat out of the bag. I end up losing this one, but I've only got 2 shells. So I've got three targets and 2 shells. And I'm just really hoping at this point to spoil a win. Or, you know, if I get crazy lucky and kill the 2 Arty with, I'd have to be ammo racks, wouldn't it? Because I don't think the HE even has enough to kill those artillery based on their hit points. Probably not. Nope. So 280 is terrible HE round. We'll come up here, and I'm just hoping again to find somebody moving around. Where is that Pantera? Looking for the Artie, looking for the Pantera. We'll go ahead and speed this up a little bit because they're going to get onto the cap. Go this way. Pretty soon we're going to get a cap. There we go. So we'll go fast. I was going after the artillery thinking, well, maybe I'll just go try to kill a couple of those guys. And we will go back up this way. Speed that thing up. And unfortunately, again, I kind of make a mistake right here. Not kind of, but definitely. I come in here looking for a light on that guy. I come in, I find him, but I'm actually seen by somebody in the bushes here. And I get one more shot of HE onto that guy, but clearly don't kill him. So no way I was going to win that with just those 2 shells. Unless somehow I got them to shoot each other, which you can't do that anymore, can you? There's no. There were a lot less options in this game. But the point of all that was just to show, had I had more ammo, had I had higher alpha or a higher DPM, you can tell how these things would be played. As opposed to a more active tank, they would be a very campy, very mobile, very stealthy TD. And I think the devs did a decent job here of bouncing them and saying, all right, well, we don't want that to happen or to be as effective. So we're going to give them a lower DPM, and we're going to maximize their stealth and to some extent their size so they can go around the game, play it a little bit differently, open up a few more places on the map that other scouts can't go to. And I know that that opinion is an unpopular one with most people in the game, but that's how I've done so well with these things. All right, let's move on to the third example. All right, this one I called Crouching Tiger Hidden Assassin. I've been talking about how this thing can use some of the positions and bushes on the map that other scouts have a harder time using or can't use at all, depending on their size and stealth. So immediately I'm going to come up here. I've been kind of, with this tank, liking this bush. I'll just come in here for a minute and just avoid being spotted immediately. And then I could tell that the enemy team really hasn't come up and over. And I see this pattern down here. So I'm just going to come up here. And I know this thing has great stealth, so I'm just going to come up here and take a shot. And I'll back out. And I actually got spotted. Probably one of their guys up high. We're working over this pattern. Take another. I hit him on that one. Unspotted now. We'll come up. This time I'll be a little bit more careful about my aim. See if I can find a nice shot on this guy. There we go. And not getting spotted. I'll back all the way up because I'm really expecting one of their lights to do a ridge run right there. And if they come up high enough, they'll see me here. There's a couple breaks in those trees. And I will spend a lot of time, again, making mistakes, trying to learn the new tank, taking shots at a Badger track, trying to help track him and kill him. I waste a lot of ammunition messing around with this guy. Now I end up helping these guys track him a few times, so ultimately I do a little bit of good there. But I probably could have been doing some more spotting. The other thing is I needed to get rid of him because I did not want to get spotted while that guy was down there. And I want to work this ridge a little bit more. So I don't really have anything but track shots. Not penetrated. He's tracked, looking forward. Now he's taking a hammering. And I know there's multiple guys over there. There we go. So we get a track on him that time. And I'm thinking, I think he actually takes some damage, but somebody else, no, not that time. I was thinking I might have got that track damage. That went into his lower plate. That's a lot of shells, like I talked about, really more or less uselessly. I should have been moving up and trying to light these guys on the other side. But we really had this Badger out in the open, so I did what I could. And finally he goes. All right, so that opens up this opportunity here. And I'm going to move up. See that 430 right there? I'm just going to move up into this bush and just hang out right here. T-49 moving around. I'm double bushed from him, so I'm going to shoot and back up. Actually takes him down, and he snaps the poor Lorraine, which is, wow. Now think of a taller scout, nearly any scout. Not all of them, but a lot of them will be much taller. They'll have a much harder time using this little row of bushes right here. Hiding, crouching down right here. This 430 is perma-spotted. Actually, it may be... I'm going to actually take an opportunity to put a shot into him right there. And that gets me spotted. He misses. Nice little low silhouette, right? So I fold down, I go down into this fold, and very difficult to hit me. If I was a taller tank, he might have had a much better shot on me. He may have been proxy lit actually by the 49 and not me right there. So I just wait for a while till I'm unlit, and I just sneak right back into the same spot. Now I'm not going to shoot because I don't know really what's in front of me right there. We'll keep this guy lit. I can see through to the Type 61, so I'm going to turn around, and I'm looking for a nice shot where I can take the shot and run for it. Just a little kind of assassin shot at him. Now this does require you look in multiple directions. You got the lobster eye going on because you don't want somebody to just come ridge running and proxy light me. That'd be the end of the day probably right there. I see the CDA, but he doesn't quite move forward. I'm just looking for opportunities to drop shells on guys. I'm going to let him go. Now, that's noted. I've got to be careful about this dude. Now, here comes a scout, so I'm going to take this opportunity. And unfortunately, I screw up because I back up. I back up right there. And that's a kind of automatic thing people do. I had turned around in order to just go forward, so a little bit of lapse of SA there, and it almost cost me. But we'll get rid of the 1390. So that's a good kill on this map. Now I'd like to track down that T49. I'm sneaking in a little bit more because I want to see if I can find, and there's the CDA right there. It kind of gets away, don't quite have the shot. I'm trying to find the 430 again, so I'm just backing into this. Looking for a shot maybe on the 61 as he goes by. And there he is, so we found him. I would imagine it was the T49 that actually got the proxy light on that guy right there. T49 bails, and now it's just me, so I've got to try to hold this. There goes the CDA. I refrain from shooting him right there, so I feel like if they realize there's not much here, they might just push over the edge. But now he's nice and lit and just taking a hammering. And just a bad shot on my part. I jerked to the shot, and look at that, didn't even get spotted. Sneak right back in. And now I see the T49. I'm thinking, oh, dude, if you come up here, I'm going to take this opportunity to do that right there. So we'll get rid of you. Didn't even get spotted. Double bushed. Tiny little tank. Good camo. Take him down and move back. I'm telling you, there are a lot of maps that have these kinds of positions, which are known positions, but can be used more effectively by this little tiny high camo tank. Looking for a shot on this guy. There you go, trying to bush up, see if I can sneak one, but he backed up, so we'll let it go. And then I noticed the Batchat 12D. Now that he's in danger of coming out and seeing me. What do? I'm so tiny, I just move into this bush. Now my side was still poking out, but I actually could have. With another couple shifts, I could be completely in this bush. Right there, there's really not another tank other than an ELC even 90 that can do that. That's completely in that tiny little row of bushes right there. Another game I had, I was in this tiny little bush, which can probably hold a slightly larger scout, but I was absolutely inside it. And the guy, they were all around me until somebody finally drove straight through the middle. We had several tanks down here. I don't know why he went straight through the middle, but he did. So he got his 50 meters and saw me. But for the longest time, I sat in that little tiny bush. It's just an example of what this tank can do, which is kind of a non-meta, right? It's a known position. People use it. People use it to shoot through. They use it to double bush. Rarely does an entire tank hide in it to where from both sides, it can be unobserved. I actually thought about moving down to the south a little bit in case they came a little bit to the edge of the town. I was worried about being proxy lit, but it was working fine where I was. I do have some TDs back there. I got a leopard. Well, he's not a TD, but he is a leopard. So I got the leopard down there. Now I'm just spinning the gun around. There's that kind of slow turret traverse, which is kind of a bummer on this thing. Try to take a shot on this guy. Just a bad shot. That was a bummer. That was a real bummer. And I probably could have got away with that shot if I'd have come out of the bush a little bit. We'll do the little power slide. 10 seconds. And again, that was not the tank so much as it was me screwing up the shot. So I'm going to come down a little lower this time. They saw me up higher, so I'll just change the position ever so slightly. GSOR, which is the bigger cousin to this thing, goes by, and now I'm just looking for a nice shot on this dude if I can get it. He's actually behind a building right there. Didn't realize that. There goes the CDA again. And we're starting to turn the tide. I've just locked down this general area, right? They're not able to use it. If I wasn't here, they'd be able to cross this street and start looking for our guys in the back there. With me sitting here lighting them every time they move around, it just gives them a lot less options and took some pressure off our guys in the town, because all these tanks sitting up here really couldn't do a whole bunch of anything unless they simply bailed out of this position and went around back to the city, which I think you'll see a couple of them have done. There goes the 69, so he's doing just that. Try to sneak a shot. I didn't even get lit by the 61. Double bushed? Nope, I did. Maybe even while I was moving. Not really sure. Potentially the 430 was probably moving around. Now there's the danger of carrying food and having no firefighters. You burn. So I got lucky I didn't die right there. There's a shot coming in that misses. Look at that low silhouette. Just difficult for him to hit me right here. And he's so busy looking at this little tiny tank trying to figure out how to get a shot that he gets hit by the 111 GFT. This takes me a while to get my stuff together. There we go. So we put a shot onto him. Not spotted. Fantastic. Come around. Look for another shot on him if I can. Here he comes. Time for another assassination as he runs off. Nope, someone else got him. That's good. I think I actually hit my friend or just plain old missed. And it's down to 2 tanks. So 1,483, 1,250 assist. Again, not a massive game, but this thing figures out ways to win, and it does it by doing little things like that. Being able to play in positions that the enemy team might not expect. And that didn't give me any more damage. So we end up winning 1,483, 1,250. So Crouching Tiger, Hidden Assassin, man. That one little kill right there and just basically locked down an entire side of the map in a spot you would not expect a scout to be able to lock down. Not many, anyway, in the game. And that is what this thing excels at. So let's go ahead and wrap this thing up. Alright, that is it for my review of the LHMTV. I want my MTV. I like this thing. Look, here's the bottom line. These are not nearly as bad, especially the Tier 8. Not nearly as bad as the hype would have you believe. That's just the honest truth. Objectively, the way they play, really, I don't know why there was such a hyperventilating response to it. I have a couple theories, but essentially, which aren't really important, but essentially it comes down to some very good players whose opinions I respect quite a bit on a lot of things in the game. For whatever reason, got on the hype train and decided that these were terrible. Mostly, I think, off of the initial stats, and sometimes without even really playing them or giving them a chance. And so now you've got big contributors and content creators whose reputation basically is on the line and who have come out vehemently against these, when in fact they really aren't that bad. And in the case of the LHMTV, are pretty good. And more importantly, and I think interestingly, in the case of the developers actually coming up with an idea, trying to create a tank that filled the niche and actually succeeding, which I don't say easily. I don't say that easily, because I have come out against that over and over again, trying to create things to fill niches when you don't know how the vehicle is going to work in the game. Simply because you can't until you release it into the wild. Well, these have been released into the wild, and they're actually very capable in what they do, which is the passive and sneaky scout role. Mainly because of the things I've been harping on, the size and the camo, the excellent pen. Despite having low DPM and low ammo count, the gun is very, very effective. And if it did have standard DPM for a Tier 8 Scout, it would actually be overpowered. It simply would be. So I appreciate that from the developers, that they've actually released a balanced, interesting tank that fills a niche that, while filled by other tanks at times, these do it better, a la the ELC EVA 90, which is a premium tank and doesn't have its own line. And some other cats and dogs who are very small tanks as well. But these, purpose-built for that purpose, purpose-built for the purpose, actually succeed in doing that, which is actually pretty amazing if you think about it, because the track record for wargaming in doing this is not very good, frankly. Now, here's the last thing I'll say about it, and the thing I think that actually amuses me the most, I think I'm going to say, because the very same people who are so vehemently against these tanks, saying they're terrible tanks, they're awful tanks, are the same people who hyperventilate about the next OP tank and how wargaming's ruining the game because the next OP tank is coming out and it's going to destroy the game. So on the one hand, stupid wargaming, you keep releasing overpowered tanks, and on the other hand, oh, you just gave us a balanced tank, so it's terrible. All right, which is it, fellas? I'm serious. Which is it? Pick one. There's valid arguments for either one. I understand that. And those things have happened in the past. I'm not denying that in any way, shape, or form. But really, we got people talking out both sides of their mouth on this one. I am looking forward to seeing what the stats look like. I will admit it's possible that the general populace is not going to be able to get the most out of these tanks. I feel like they're a high skill floor, high skill ceiling kind of tank. But I really think they're going to be just fine stats-wise. And that was alluded to a little bit in a recent Q&A from the developers. It's going to be a low sample size. You know, it'll probably take 6 months before we really know. But it will be very interesting when the stat sites start picking up the last month, last 2 month, last 3 month kind of stats for these tanks and see where they rack and stack amongst their peers at the various tiers. And I'm going to tell you, the last thing I'll say, this is a really fun tank. It really is. It's got a lot of neat things going for it. If you play it right, you're going to have a really good time. If you're any kind of scout player, I highly recommend it. Do I have to say it again? It just simply is not as bad as all the hyperventilating would have you believe. It really isn't. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I appreciate it. Go ahead, tell me where I'm wrong down below. I have no doubt that I'm going to be told how wrong I am by some people. That's fine. We can have a discussion, and we will see you later.